Good morning, ATL. Welcome to the Dirty South Security Podcast, coming to you live from the A. If you're not from Atlanta, this is what we call our city. Right, Kofi?
Yes, sir. That's how we call it, man. Welcome to the A, Dirty South.
That's right. That's right. We're doing the Dirty Security Podcast today, sponsored by VERSPRITE, Evolve Security Consulting. Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is our first ever Dirty South Security Podcast. So we're going to introduce ourselves. Kofi, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background before we dive in?
Yes, sir. So, I am known as Kofi, and I have been in this industry for about 18 years. Mostly specialized in the offensive security side of things. So we try to simulate or mimic the bad guys. I have done it all. Name it. Started off with, vuln assessments, went into attack and penetration testing, got into adversarial simulations. So, network penetration tests, ATM hacking, POS hacking, IoT hacking, social engineering, all of those things. I have done it. I have ranked up from just being individual contributor all the way through to building programs for institutions. My client size or the industry has been from medium size to Fortune 100 companies and even a government. So I'm excited to be here with Tony on this podcast.
Nice. Well, it sounds like a lot of your background actually got yourself pretty dirty and very, very appropriate for the Dirty South Cybersecurity Podcast, where we like to talk and dive in and get dirty on different topics. My background, I'm Tony UV. I'm an author of Risk-Centric Threat Modeling. I'm also the CEO of VERSPRITE, Ultra Cloud, and VERTalents, a global cybersecurity staffing and recruiting firm. Based out of the A, both of us are. 27 years of IS experience. Started out in IT, so more on the functional side, and then went to the dark side of cybersecurity. And much like my friend here, Kofi, I've spent a lot of time in enterprise security programs, which is a great segue what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to get dirty. Our first topic ever is really about the topic of what the hell is wrong with enterprise security, right? So we did a top 10 list, and we're just going to dive in. We in really no particular order, Kofi. I was looking at this list earlier today that we were kind of sharing before and coming up with this program, but there's a lot of hot topics here. Honestly, we could do an hour on just any one of these topics, really.
Yes, sir.
But let's lay the foundation. We're coming straight for the A. By the way, I'm repping the national team Peruvian uniform. Shout out to Peruvian cybersecurity leaders out there. Kofi, you got the whole African montage. What's going on in that image there? That's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yes, sir. That is the futuristic African, continent that I see myself in. So nice. You can see the background, a little bit of birds in the sky, have the trees. And, most people, when they talk about Africa, it's all about the jungle and stuff like that. But in this case, I'm futurizing that. So that's, I can see that is, in that kind of context. So I'm repping. Unfortunately, I didn't, bring my soccer team, my Ghanaian soccer, national team here. Next time I promise I'll bring that. So
we got to wait for the Africa Cup, right? When's the Africa Cup?
So right now we're playing the qualifications for World Cup. So that is and I think the Europeans are playing playing too. So
that's right. Yep. Well, let's dive in. So first, number one area of what the hell is wrong with enterprise security is number one, no one wants real security. And I'll go ahead and start on this one, and what I mean by that is having lived through being a CISO and working within enterprise security programs. When you start to lay down the foundation of what really needs to be done as it relates to application security, security operations, detection, monitoring, response, governance, right, or risk management, risk decisioning, it's too much for the business, right? And oftentimes, that's partially the fault of security practitioners that don't know how to message well. They don't know really how to convey security outside of what they've been instructed to or taught to. And they need to be able to take that level of enterprise security best practices, which is a term I absolutely hate, but I'll use it simply because, there's a lot of things that are taught in different courses, around the world, and they can't really reconcile what needs to be done to supporting the business. And so when a lot of businesses on the financial side, on the product side, on the IT side, they basically are given all of these requirements of what needs to be done from security, they're like, wait a minute, I was just kidding. I didn't really want to go through all of this of like, wait, you want to talk about preemptive security hardening? Wait, we want to do threat modeling in my SDLC and take some additional time? You want to teach my developers about how to code? Like, this is too problematic, right? So my opinion, from real life experiences is really, it's no one really wants it. They say it because it looks good, it's defensible, they don't want to get sued. But what are your takes, Kofi?
You're right, Tony. And just by the way, you said something about best practice and how you hate it. I haven't heard that in a long time because about 12 years ago or so, that was an impression what somebody told me. That I walked in first and I was talking about best practice that, and we're like, no, we don't say that here. We say leading practice because it's difficult to define best, right? It's relative term, right? So that was just by the way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, let's face it, guys. Sometimes it feels like it's a constant battle of people trying to convince leadership, that security is more than just like a checkbox exercise, right? And we all seen systems slow down, due to restrictive, controls in place, and people get pissed off at that. Like, they get, what's going on, right? And at the same time, we also see budgets being cut down, right? So we are always in that constant battle of trying to convince leadership that we need to do this, right? As you were saying, we need to train your developers, need to input security into their way of doing things, right? And in our course of trying to convince leadership, it's hard for us not to get examples to explain why or to back up our explanation. And that was about maybe I'll say 15, 20 years ago. But nowadays, it's a lot easier because now we have data. I mean, we have real world breaches that goes on, and we are able to now use those. And in my case, for instance, when I'm talking to my clients or I'm talking to leadership, trying to explain why we need to have your developers build security into their developing programs, I'm using real world examples of high profile breaches because of all these things. And I think that is one way of us being able to convince or educate leadership that we need to have all these things in place.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to number 2, and we both didn't touch upon this on the first question in terms of, again, this is the top 10 list of what the hell is wrong with enterprise security. Number 2, corporate politics. So imagine this. All right, you're the CISO and you're working for a Fortune 50 organization. In today's world of 2024, CISO at the very least might be taking $250K, in the United States, as a base salary on the low side. You have some CISOs that are bringing in, over $500,000, and that is without any sort of variable compensation. And so when you have that amount of, compensation, and then at the same time, there's a lot of liability, right? I mean, you're basically a fall person. If something goes wrong, you're out the door. So a lot of times CISOs are burnt out, but they don't want to engage, and they don't also have a lot of experience in playing the chess match of corporate politics, right? The CISOs like CIO, COO, CEO, CFO, and interfacing with the board, they're running the business. They're keeping the books tight. They're looking for M&A strategies. They're contributing to things that are affecting earnings per share and overall the financial statements and things like that. When it comes to security is the individual, they have to basically try to acquiesce to a lot of the business demands and needs. And what ends up happening is that they don't want to get their hands slapped. And so corporate politics is real. There's always agendas in any type of organization, even a nonprofit. There's always politics. And so I think a lot of security leaders, unfortunately, they're not really well versed in how to navigate that political scene at a corporate level, right? So that affects communication, that affects representation of security issues from more of a business context. And they lack that level of polish to be able to take important security themes and say, this is how it affects us legally. This is how it affects us in a regulatory standpoint. This is how it affects our go-to-market strategies. This is how it affects customer retention. These types of terms are oftentimes foreign to most cybersecurity leaders because they're thinking more on the vernacular that they're comfortable with and not in the vernacular and the types of chess moves that you need to have when you're playing corporate politics.
Yeah. The fun of corporate politics, Tony. I mean, we've all been there, and we always, struggling in that regards, trying to get the corporate security buy-in from stakeholders who prioritize, other goals, outside of us. Because let's face it, and as you said, when it comes to security, we don't bring in any money necessarily. I mean, the return on investment is not that visible. Okay, we're trying to put out fire as opposed to us bringing in money to organizations, and us trying to play that chess moves with leadership, who are focused more on how do we keep the lights on. Sometimes can be very, very, very much challenging for us, right? So here's the thing, though. I mean, security needs to be collaborative. Okay, we need to bridge a gap between security and then other teams or other departments, such as marketing, engineering, and even the C-suite levels. All right, we need to be able to speak their language, be able to translate security into business risk. Okay, so you're trying to sell to leadership. Let's buy this product, or let's do this. Let's implement this particular solution. And it's going to cost us X amount of money. That is for the leadership. Non-security people, they see money being moved, leaving the company, right? Not coming in. So how do we flip it, talk in their language to understand their business risk? Well, if you don't do this, what if we got compromised? What are the consequences of it? Are they going to outweigh the money you would have invested in this particular solution, right? So that is the way for us to be able to flip it and then show them, if we don't spend this kind of money on this particular solution, then the downside of it is we end up spending more money should anything bad happen, right? So be able to juggle that, conversation with leadership. And that has been the biggest problem for us most of the time when it comes to playing politics with leadership. So, yeah.
Absolutely. All right. We move on to number 3. Number 3 on what the hell is wrong with enterprise security is, well, compliance is still in the driver's seat. Let's talk about compliance. In my circles, I like to say that compliance is the dirty little C word because, it's a catch-22. It's the alphabet soup of regulatory compliance that puts security on the map for a lot of organizations. Without compliance, we got to recognize that a lot of organizations wouldn't even address cybersecurity, information security, data privacy at all. So there's that, which is good. But the bad thing is that compliance still in 2024 today, after, years, decades of breaches, of mishaps, misconfigurations, just egregious errors in enterprise security, compliance, my contention is that it's still the finish line for a lot of organizations. So, take the retail and financial sector, one regulation that's more of a private regulation is the payment card industry data security standard. You move over to healthcare, you have FDA requirements for products. You have, of course, HIPAA for, data privacy on patient side. And these organizations and more, right? And every industry has their own set of regulations, some more than others, basically oftentimes look at compliance as the finish line to a security program or security efforts versus actually a starting point. And so you take most organizations that combine 2 or 3 of these compliance efforts. Let's say that they're doing PCI and they're doing a SOC 2 because it's client driven. They have to have a SOC 2 type 1 or type 2. then they are overwhelmed, they're overburdened by that compliance initiative. So when you come altruistically as a security leader and you want to talk real security shop, they're like, wait a minute, we just had months of compliance talk that sounds very similar to your security talk. So pump the brakes. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And so they get fatigued. And so, but oftentimes a lot of organizations, they're just still very much compliance driven. And here we are in 2024. And both you and I have been doing this for decades. And, it's still unfortunate to see that enterprise security is still letting compliance be in that driver's seat.
Yeah, Tony, and I think I don't know if you remember, but I recall that I think about 2 years ago at B-Side Atlanta, where I run a table with other, CISOs and CFOs and, CEOs, and I brought this interesting, nerve-wracking topic about how compliance is actually one of the reasons why most of these companies are being breached, right? And I don't want to place it at the back end. Compliance is good. Absolutely, we need it, right? But most companies are using it, and it's supposed to be the minimum. But most companies are using it as their ultimate, right? As the only way for them to actually deal with cybersecurity. And that is one of the reasons why we are seeing most of these, breaches, right? And I think I brought it up, and people were like, "Yeah, what do you mean by that?" And I was like, "Yeah, most companies are using that as our go-to. And the bad guys that we're trying to simulate, they are not following any rules. All right. The compliance is supposed to be a check for you to say, okay, just the basic minimum. But most companies, leadership, don't want to deal with any of all these other stuff around it. This is what it says. Let's just use it, right? And I have a perfect example for that. I think about 12 years or 13 years ago, I was going on a penetration test in engagement for a client, and we're using a compliance thing for them because they were in the payment card. I didn't want to mention that, but it was PCI, right? And we went in. Of course, they had a requirement. PCI had its own requirement for how to perform penetration tests, right? Of course, they do review it periodically, but at the time, part of it was supposed to run wound scans on an internal pen test. All right, so I explained to the client, listen, we are trying to simulate real threat actors. No bad actor is going to come into your network and then spin off wound scans, make noise on your network. They want to stay low and slow and then just grab and then leave. So let us simulate such scenarios for you. We will still capture and touch all the pieces required by PCI. But management was like, no, we want you to just blast those tools for us, Nestles, all those things. I was like, okay, let's compromise. How about I spend the half of the entire engagement, simulate real threat actors, and then once I'm done, I'll just blast off the tools for you so I can at least meet your needs as well. So there was a balance here in which they did agree. Well, within just few hours, I had compromised the entire organization without even the IT guys knowing what was going on. I was on their network, did everything that I was able to do, jumped from CD to non-CD environment and back and forth. And then half of the day and half of the engagement, I was like, okay, I'm going to get into the deal. I'm going to spin off these tools so at least you'll be happy with it. As soon as I turn on these tools, blast it off, in just an hour, the IT guys came on looking for me because I was like in a cubicle. These guys are I think it was just about 30 minutes or so, came on looking for me. So I just raised up my hands. I was like, yo, you guys looking for me? They were like, yeah, we're looking for you, an IT auditor. I was like, no, I'm not an IT auditor. So what's up? They said, well, one of our servers is rebooting, and it's our SAP server. And we've seen like a huge traffic bouncing this server, and it just keep crashing. And then all of a sudden, I have to turn off my wound scan tools. You see, so that actually made a point to leadership. They learned their lesson from that, because this is a leadership that just picked up this document that we just want to be compliant, wound scan done, check, and the stuff like that. And that is all they wanted to do. But again, it comes down to us with experience in this field, and then educate leadership and our client and let them know that, listen, compliance is good, but it's just the minimum. The bad guys are evolving every single second, every single day, and we need to do that, even if we have to comply with other regulations. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
So many good nuggets there. We definitely got to put a bookmark on that one. We got to come back. It's a hot area, and unfortunately, I'm just envisioning what executives and C-levels say when they're basically asking the question, okay, well, is what you're trying to do called upon in the 12 domains of PCI DSS? And if it's not explicitly, then I just want to do what's in the 12 domains of PCI DSS, or what is the audit, what is the QSA, the Qualified Security Assessor, going to say, right? Because they're very mission driven. They want that rubber stamp, they want that rock, that record of compliance, and but there's I think, to your point, you can get both, right, if you do the right engagement model correctly. But that is a whole separate topic. There's a lot of hot topics in there, a lot of great nuggets. So thanks for putting that down. Let's move on to number 4 on what the hell is wrong with enterprise security. Security is overpriced and your program is broke. Okay, so this is a fun one. In 2024, the price of cybersecurity tools, the price of cybersecurity talent is very overpriced, in my personal opinion. And I'll put down some reasons shortly. So first off, the majority on the tool space, you think about as a startup company that is getting seed money, then going to an A round and a B round, they're getting an injection of 10, 20, 30, maybe sometimes even 50 million in cash, and everyone celebrates on LinkedIn. But the reality is that you have the grim reaper of investors being like, okay, party's over, the next day, how are you using this money? Who are you hiring, right? And they hire the best of the best. And if you just basic business management, when you are spending a lot more money and you have that, overpriced, startup office, and you're paying for the ping pong tables and the expensive social events, and you drop easily like $250,000 in conferences like Black Hat or, RSA, then as a business, right, you're doing a lot of financial mismanagement. And so you have to recoup that with your prices. And a lot of companies in cybersecurity are very poorly run, and they're putting down, close to $1 million licensing fees on pretty simple, in my opinion, pretty simplistic security tools that are not really that next gen or advanced as the marketing departments are touting them to be. So that's on the contention that the supply chain of security solutions today are way overpriced, but that's driven largely because of, I think, a lot of private equity is pumping money into these companies and really demanding that their return on investment gets back. So you can't really sell your software for maybe $125,000 a year or $225,000 a year. You now have to come closer to $1 million a year. One of the reasons I started a cloud security tool was because the market was flooded with a lot of tool players that are charging like close to $1 million in subscription fees just for cloud security posture management. And so now let's talk about the resources and the talent. So yes, the finding cybersecurity talent is becoming more and more increasingly difficult for a lot of different reasons we're not going to get into right now in this podcast. But overall, the prices has gone up because there's been a burnout. There's been less and less availability of individuals that are qualified. When they are qualified, they generally do not have a long, sustainable career because of burnout, because of also they join an organization, they don't have enough tools in terms of resources to execute on the right strategy, so they dip out because they have a lot of liability on their back. They're basically carrying the security yeses and nos for the organization on their back, and if something happens, it's their head on the chopping block. So basically the compensation, I'm not saying that it's not merited, because they are assuming a lot of individual risk. We see a lot of cases just last year where a lot of CISOs took some inadvertent footsteps in the wrong direction, and it cost them, even some time being prosecuted with criminal charges, around their name. So it's these things really, make it so that it's difficult to afford cybersecurity correctly. And then last but not least, the broke aspect, right? A lot of cybersecurity budgets, they're just done incorrectly. I think that oftentimes they don't look at their program holistically. They look at and they start to speak about their program in terms of like just designer labels. And this is no dig to any particular cybersecurity vendor I'm going to mention. Some of these cybersecurity vendors I'm going to mention are actually, respect in terms of what they put forth. But if they're going to basically say, well, I need this Gartner related tool, I need this other Gartner related tool, I need this other Gartner related tool, I need 10 people to manage it, I need these outside, grade A list consulting firms to be able to do my annual audits, my annual whatever services, then I think a lot of times they don't leave room for a discretionary fund. You always need a discretionary fund in security to handle things like incident response, like forensics, like unforeseen changes in your resources, your vendors, that allows you to be able to flex and to respond to changes in the overall threat landscape of your industry. So that's some of my top reasons there. What do you think, Kofi?
Yeah, Tony, I totally agree with you, with your points. I would start off from the back, which is the broken part of it. And I think sometimes too, it comes down to people who do not necessarily understand cybersecurity. So they go off with marketing, stuff on the internet, as you were saying, Gartner this, and then they're like, oh, this must be good, let's buy it, right? But if you're somebody who understands cybersecurity, and to prioritization or optimization, you are very careful with what you choose. And I'll use myself as an example. I mean, in my line of work, of course, I manage a team of OffSec team, and of course, I have to understand what we need and how we can be much more efficient and effective on our tooling, right? And leadership are like, okay, it's yearly, budgeting time. Steve, bring the list of tools you need and other needs that you need. And I just told them, okay, well, need all these tools, but they are open source tools. And they were like, don't you need some of these high-end expensive tools? I was like, no, I don't need those things. I understand what my team needs to do, and I think the open source tool that we're getting, which is of course us being much more efficient and not just going out and buying just because of their names. This will be good for us to start with what we need. If we need to go higher up and then buy some of these expensive ones, we will. But for now, we need all these tools, and these are free and open for us to then accomplish our goal, right? So I think it comes down to what I was saying. If you understand cybersecurity, if you understand what you're doing, you buy your tools or you acquire your tool set and you put up your programs accordingly without just jumping on other. But I've also seen organizations, and as we were saying, EDR solutions, they have like almost about 10 EDR solutions across the entire organization because they are on some high ranking statistics that they are very good and they're expensive, right? And they just buying them. And that is where the broken aspect of it comes in. Now, the overpriced, still a little bit of that is because these guys are able to have good PR out there. They have like investment companies backing them. They have to overprice it so they can get their returns on investment. And because, again, leadership may not understand what they need, they will just go out there and just keep buying, keep shopping. And then at the end of the day, they will tell you security is tight, budget is tight because we buy all these tools and we can recruit additional resources, which I think we'll talk about that, in a moment. But, talking about overpriced tools, human capital, have now become overpriced because of shortage in our industry. And I think we'll touch on that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's move on. We're almost halfway there. This is the fifth topic on what the hell is wrong with enterprise security. And number 5, most CISOs know very little about security. And, I'll start with this controversial subject. I feel a lot of our listeners that might be CISOs out there might be leaning in on this one.
Carefully, Tony.
I know. I got to watch out. But this is the Dirty South Security podcast, so we're keeping it real here in the A. Yeah, so the reality is that there's a lot of CISOs that may have come from, different beginnings, right? Some of them might have a strong compliance background. And again, we've talked about the necessity for compliance, the importance of compliance. But, let's just speak truthfully about the CISO role. It does require a very well-balanced background in both security and also IT. And a lot of people get to the level of being a CISO, for various reasons. Sometimes going back to politics, it's because of politics, right? Sometimes there might be executive team members that say, let's go ahead and move this chess piece. And if for those that haven't seen this type of politics happen, it's highly prevalent in the enterprise, Fortune 500, right? And so oftentimes executive team members, they want to have a friendly person that they can govern, control, and sway or dissuade on cybersecurity things. It's in their own benefit because they don't want someone to, again, going back to our number one topic, which no one wants real security. They want to be able to put, these individuals that they can somewhat puppeteer, if you will. To be a CISO, it requires, I think, a lot of courageousness. Let's begin with that. And for me, in my experiences of what I've seen, both from having worked enterprise security and having consulted with enterprise security at a global level, there's very few leaders that really want to have that level of courageousness, number one. Number two, the technical background to be able to navigate from governance, understanding true risk management, risk decisioning, risk treatment, all the way going into now functional IT, understanding on-prem legacy systems that might be encompassing mainframe environments or mid-range environments or, traditional, distributed x86 type environments, all the way into now cloud and serverless, type environments. It's a lot to cover. So in defense of CISOs really not having enough of a background, the CISOs that have come up over the past couple of decades have largely been, with a background in one particular area, and that's provided, unfortunately, blinders to other areas that are very important. How many times do we see security programs, security leaders in, let's say, AppSec or in vuln management or in incident response? And all of these disciples, if you will, in a security program, they don't all get equal time and appreciation for their silo of work. And it largely can do with some of what the CISO places as a priority. If you have a CISO that is more compliance driven or risk driven, then they're just going to be relying on risk metrics and not really, maybe from a nefarious standpoint, trying to emulate or think like a criminal when they're trying to emulate, red teaming activities, or they're trying to emulate, true internal network pen testing activities and things like that. So I think background has unprepared a lot of CISOs in terms of where they are today. And then additionally, I think a lot of them have come to a point where they've been placed there, and it's opportune for the other people that are truly running the organization. But what do you think, Kofi?
Yeah, so I'll say let's rephrase this one a bit. I know this is a dirty South, and we go at it, the way it's supposed to be. But having been a VCISO and then being in that capacity before, I'm a little bit trying to play the middle man here, so I don't step on the toes of the CISOs. But Tony, CISO is actually, of course, you've done it several times, so in your career, so you would agree with me here. It's very challenging. I would say the CISO role is evolving, right? Because when you go in as a real technical CISO and you speak, these guys are looking at you like, yeah, you're too technical, we can understand you, right? And if you go in or you come in, or the CISO is much more of like a business person who doesn't understand cybersecurity that much, you also get bashed a bit that, well, you don't understand cybersecurity. So the CISO is now caught in the middle here. And over time, I think we have seen this role evolving a bit, because I think about like 15 years ago or something like that, the placement on even the org chart was different from nowadays. The CISO was like somewhere below somewhere. But now I've seen organizations now putting the CISO directly under the CEO. So things have evolved a bit, right? From being too technical or not technical at all, and then being able to be the translator, being able to have that, being able to translate and then have a bridge between the technical people and then the business people, and to be able to advocate in between the two, right? So yes, most started off not knowing this line of work, and that was a challenge. Some came in very technical, and it was also a challenge because they couldn't speak the language with the business acumen that it was supposed to. But I think over time, we are seeing a bit of a balance. We're not there yet. We still have a whole lot of long way to go. But I think the role, as soon as you see yourself as a CISO, that your role, one of them is for you to be a translator, be able to have both technical expertise and also business acumen, be able to translate between tech people and then the business leaders. I think that will make you the great CISO.
All these topics again, is they really warrant their own podcast. And I think, it's food for thought as we evolve the Dirty South Security podcast. But let's go on to number 6. Why the hell is enterprise security so broken today in 2024? Number 6 is endless remediation queues. So let's talk about, for those that might not be familiar with what we're talking about here, remediation is basically, what you're trying to culminate to when you're basically doing a lot of different security efforts that are more detective or preventative in nature, such as, for example, running vulnerability scans as one example. So in an enterprise security program, you want to have as much coverage of your attack surface as possible, and you want to scan on a regular basis to see what aspects of your infrastructure of your attack surface is vulnerable. Now you have results, and you need to be able to weed those overall results into true positives that go into a remediation queue. Assuming that your queue is pristine and highly accurate, which we both know that it's not. A lot of, and this goes back to, the last point on CISOs. Oftentimes there's a lot of CISOs or security programs that just take the output of a security scanner or security tool and they just funnel it into a major remediation queue. And what that does is I've seen enterprises that have literally millions of remediation items to fix. And even if you go from a number like 50 million, right? And I've seen this 50 million remediation items to fix down to 15 million. Like, what are you going to show off to the board? What are you going to show off to, the overall the enterprise when you're doing a quarterly, security review report card? 30 million to 50 million, 15 million, still nothing to brag about. Remediation queues are broken and they're mismanaged. And, in today's world, there's a lot of opportunity for greater automation, for qualifying what goes in that queue. But we're talking about some of the things that are systemic failures in security, enterprise security today. A lot of times these queues are just being piled on by all these different scanners. AppSec scanners, DAS scanners, SCA scanners, vulnerability scanners, code review scanners, cloud security posture management tool scanners. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And so you have these queues, and the people that are having to remediate them are developers, are engineers, are DevOps personnel, right? Infrastructure engineers. And they're just being peppered all over the place, right? And they're also being choked. We talked about burnout on the security side. A lot of these IT people, they go to their superiors and they say, listen, you can get me to do these functional aspects that are going to make the company money, or you can get me to address these security issues, which right now they're not affecting anything. What do you want me to do? And this is a real question. And so oftentimes the business says, I want you to do your job and focus on this stuff because I need this to work because we have $1 million contract here or $1 billion contract there. And so remediation queues are a major problem. They haven't really evolved over the past 2-3 decades in a sophisticated manner. But Kofi, I'm going to stop and let you join in on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, Tony, and you're right. I mean, we've all been there. I'm dealing with these things like, day in and day out. And you forgot to even throw in SAS and DAS scans, coming from all these, especially if you work for an organization that develops software, right? We have tens of products we develop for all types of organizations. So I could, relate to that when we have, as part of our SSDLC, we have these tools automating most of these things, and then have like a pile of vulnerabilities. You feel like you're being drawn in it, and on top of that, from from pen testing side of stuff coming in as well. So the team always find themselves as being like drowning in a sea of vulnerabilities, right? But there has to be a strategy, right? And I think you touched on that a bit, right? First, we need to prioritize, all right? Even if you have like you said, 50,000 vulnerabilities, there still has to be prioritization, because not all vulnerabilities are created equally, right? So you have to be able to focus on the ones that pose the biggest threat to your most critical systems or your assets, right? And then second, automation. Okay, and especially with the nowadays, we have automation tools, orchestration tools coming up. These are ways for you to streamline your process of managing your remediation process. Otherwise, if you are going to throw in human beings all the time, they are going to get burned. And that goes back to our previous discussion, right? So I think these are some of the strategies you may want to put in place. Is let's prioritize the ones which are much more critical or bigger threat to our critical amino acids. And then second, how do we automate the ones we feel like they are not too much of importance, and then have them being patched. And I think this will be a very good strategy going forward, to build your remediation programs.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to number 7 on what the hell is wrong with enterprise security. Poor habits and risk treatment. This is a topic we could have a 3-part series on this one, but really quick, there's so many things that are wrong with risk treatment. Risk treatment, by the way, is how you're treating risk issues that you're managing in your security program, right? You either ignore a risk, you transfer the risk, you mitigate the risk, you remediate the risk. We talked about remediation. There's different forms of risk treatment that you take in your risk decisioning. And first thing that I think is a causal factor for this area is a lot of security programs don't have a good cohesive understanding collectively on what is risk. And there's a lot of misnomers on the risk variables. Sometimes they'll call a weakness a risk. Sometimes they'll call a threat a risk. When you're looking at different types of reports, security people within their own respective swim lanes will actually interswap terms that doesn't do any service to the audiences and the internal customers in an enterprise organization. And so when you're basically switching words and you're, let's say, finding a injection flaw that you found through a dynamic application scanner, and you're calling that a risk, well, it's not really a risk until you actually add some context, right? How does that vulnerability affect the component in your infrastructure, in your application model, that actually creates some level of impact that you genuinely care about? Right. And I think that security professionals, this goes back to, the topic of number 5, where CISOs know very little about security. Part of knowing about security is knowing about how what your threshold and what your definitions are for risk are for the organization, right? From a cyber perspective. And so what I'll end with this. What baffles me in enterprise security is that oftentimes, let's say that you're actually in Africa right now and I'm in Peru, right? Where we grew up or where we visit and our friends and family, might be, we might have different mechanisms of how we protect our family. We might have different threat concerns, some environmental, some, society related and whatnot. And so what I do maybe in like one part of Peru, like let's say Jesus Maria, as a district in Lima, versus what you do, in where you grew up, it might be totally different. But we innately understand what are the threats around us, where do we have vulnerabilities in our, personal dwellings, so that we can know what types of mitigations that we want to have, because we don't want to accept certain level of risk levels. So what are your thoughts on that, Kofi?
Yeah, so my philosophy is identifying risk is only half of the battle, right? Mm-hmm. We need to be able to develop a plan, to address them. And coming from what I'm doing currently, where I lead a team, we mostly perform these tests, right? And then we find vulnerabilities, we find attack vectors, we are able to provide proof of concepts all the way through to breaching the application side layer all the way down to the network level, right? And then you present these things to the software engineers or the developers, and they take a look at it like, yeah, we have a GA release coming up next week, and we can't fix this before GA release. So now that comes in, the concept about money comes in now, because now my vulnerabilities are now blocking the company from making money, because we have a due date to release this software out there, right? So now this is becoming a problem. We have identified the problem, the vulnerabilities right now, or the risk right now, but the half of it is having a very good plan in place to address them. And this means assigning ownership for the risk mitigation, and then setting realistic timelines, and then also tracking the progress of it, right? So it comes down to, okay, how do we communicate? How do we find a good line, and then making sure that we are assigning these vulnerabilities to owners and then tracking them. And an example that I have seen actually working well is having a centralized location, and then of risk entries, and then assigning responsibilities, and then being on top of these people or the stakeholders who are responsible, and reporting to you periodically, and going through the phases of remediation of this particular risk, whether it's being accepted, it's being like transferred and stuff like that. All right. So often risks get identified and nothing happens. And that is becoming like the cycle that I have seen a lot. But now I'm seeing a shift here, because that shouldn't be the case. Find it. That is half part of it. The second part is planning, assigning ownership, and then tracking the progress of it, and then completely take action, whether you're going to accept it finally, or you're going to remediate it or get rid of it.
Absolutely. Let's move on to number 8. And these next two ones we'll probably move pretty quickly because they're somewhat related, and it relates to resources within enterprise security programs. Number 8, the skills gap is real. I'll begin by saying that a lot of the educational opportunities, both in the private sector as well as in traditional 4-year degree universities, are not adequately preparing a lot of our, at least US-based students in the areas properly in cybersecurity. Even if you look at programs that do have dedicated training on cybersecurity, first off, a lot of the individuals at an individual level cannot and do not afford some of these multi-$1,000 training fees. And that's number one. So there's opportunity, lack of opportunity. Number two is real world experiences. The gap between what is taught and what is actually taking place in terms of real world experiences is a huge gap. Oftentimes, even if you have the luxury of going to, let's say, taking a SANS class and getting hands-on training, or taking something that's maybe online, you're trying to you learn these concepts, but applying concepts, as it is with really in any field, really, it's no different. Learning something in the classroom where it's largely theoretical, it's in a controlled environment, versus actual environments where you have not just like, the things that you have to detect and worry about from the threat actor side in terms of what they're doing, but you also have to make sure that you don't bring your own infrastructure down as you're doing it. And that could be as you're doing forensics, as you're doing any sort of like preventative scanning, rogue asset discovery. I think what's really missing in the skills gap is understanding some level of functional IT engineering. And a major gap that happens, a major conversation that happens online on X, formerly Twitter, is that you do not need to be technical in order to be security. You see all these lists where it says, hey, you can be in cybersecurity and you can go on this track. And it's true, you can. You can be an auditor, you can, understand privacy regulations and do a gap analysis on what is required on these laws and statutes, and then provide some level of value. But overall, where we need the most help is still within the technical realm. And for those that are contemplating, cybersecurity and just want to get in because you're chasing a dollar or a salary amount, which a lot of people get into this field because it is lucrative, there is, again, a lot of demand and there's not enough supply. They're like, let me just jump in here and go ahead and get paid. That's the wrong approach. And oftentimes the amount of self-investment that they're taking, they're thinking, well, if I just learn these concepts, I'm going to go ahead and be relatable and be able to provide value. And unfortunately, that's incorrect, because at the end of the day, it comes down to, I'll end with this example. I have a neighbor that was international, like not interns, but resident doctors that went from a very prominent university, with, a lot of color and distinction in their academia. But when it comes down to getting into the OR, the operating room, like they fumbled, right? They're caught in a frozen moment. It's the same thing in cybersecurity. When the stuff hits the fan, do you know enough about the details of a particular incident, even if it's outside of an incident? Because I'm not just talking about incident response, but other types of just, AppSec decisioning, understanding frameworks, understanding protocols, understanding, RFC specifications, overall engineering function. I think there's a huge gap in that area, and we're really caught that flat-footed. I don't see a particular way to kind of hack or shortcut that, skills gap. But what do you think, Kofi?
Yeah, so when I'm viewing the skills gap, I'm taking an approach of looking at it from two different perspectives. One is those who are already in the industry, and those who are trying to get into the industry, right? So let's take those who are already in the industry, right? There was one quote from one of these prominent leaders that talked about training and development, right? So this guy goes to the CEO and tells the CEO, listen, I don't want to invest in training my employees because I fear if I train them, they may leave. And the CEO told the person that, well, if you don't train them, now they stick around and they suck, and they will make our job difficult, right? Because they are not well trained, right? So the skill gap, one aspect is those who are already in the system. Okay, how are we building them up so they are much more efficient to do their job, right? Mm-hmm. And that comes down to training and investment. Okay, as an organization, what do you have in place to train your cybersecurity professionals, to maintain them, to keep that gap so they don't leave you and then leave a gap in the organization, right? And that is important. An example is, whatever I've been at, I always make sure that there's a budget of training for my team. Even if it's just a week or so, where do you want to go to? You want to go to a conference, go acquire new knowledge or new skill set, whatever, to keep you sharpened so I can be much more efficient as a team. So that is one part of this gap here, is we are seeing some organizations not investing enough in their team to maintain that gap and make them much more efficient. On the other side is those who are trying to break into it. And as you said, that is one thing that is difficult for us to even carve out any hack to solve that issue, because now we are being sometimes unfair to some of these guys, because you will see some entry-level positions on platforms such as LinkedIn asking for entry-level analysts of cybersecurity, and they're asking for about 10 years of experience. Right? How the hell do you want this person as an entry level to have 5 years, 10 years of experience in this industry when there is no way for them to even get in, get into the front door, right? So I think the entry to, there has been some barrier of us bringing in more resources, because the expectations from our side is we are not doing more to even nurture, train, or intern them and then transform them to become part of us. We expect them to just come in already ready, and that hasn't worked that way. You gave an example. I have examples of people who have taken certifications and then top-notch, like really good PR certifications. On their first pen test, they brought down an organization's infrastructure, right? And I had to be called in. It was like, doing a consulting, work, and then I had a call from a client. The guy that you guys sent over just brought down our network infrastructure. And this guy is holding one of those well-known certifications in the industry, right? Because we made a mistake by not nurturing, mentoring, and then making sure this person was ready when they just stepped, into this industry. So those are the two places I would focus more on when it comes to the gap. Of course, there are so many reasons people will come up, But I think the biggest are those who are trying to get in. What are we doing to make them much more comfortable and ready for the industry? And those who are already in the industry, how are we maintaining them, training them, having them, build up their skill set so they are always relevant? And the last piece of it is also the mindset of the new entrants. I mean, you and I go all the way back how we got into this field, right? I got in because I like to hack. I self-taught myself how to hack, and I enjoyed it, even way before it even became a career for me. And most of the guys in this industry, like, OGs like you and all those, they love the thought of just doing these things before they realize it's a career that they can, actually make money off of it. But this generation always thinking about, there's money in this field, so let me just get into it. So they come in and they don't have a desire. I teach cybersecurity, so I have had people always coming up to me, how do I get in? And at the moment I begin to tell them the steps and something they have to do, now they are discouraged because they believe, oh man, there's money in it. The money is not driving them, and they're coming with no love for the industry. But you and I, the OGs, got in because we love what we did until we actually saw it was a career for us to pick up. And that's also another part of it.
Kofi, you're going old school on everybody out here, man. I like it. I like it. Well, you put down some thoughts that are relevant to number 9. Everyone is burnt out.
Yeah.
And this is a factor in what the hell is wrong with enterprise security. Those that are in it and actually, have put in their scar tissue and have done a great job of being passionate, to your point, on, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, dedicated to the field, genuinely interested, they're burnt out for a lot of the things that we covered. Some of it is because they're trying to do the right thing, but they're superseded by compliance efforts. They're trying to do the right thing, but business politics and security politics actually take away the shine of what they're trying to do that's altruistic for the organization. They're burnt out because cybersecurity is stressful. Every day there's a new type of hack, there's a new type of breach, there's a new type of attack vector. Your enterprise is adopting new technologies. In the world of DevOps, there's a lot more autonomy in terms of what is actually brought into an environment that is a part of that environment's attack surface. It could be a new micro framework, it could be a new framework, it could be a new plugin, it could be a new version of jQuery. It could be anything that basically makes the whole stability of what you think is really, there's no stability in security, but oftentimes you're always having to be concerned about, is this the day? Am I missing something, right? So that constantly puts a lot of stress on a lot of individuals. So you add on all the things that we've talked about today, even people that are making bank. And, again, going back to that, just making money is not the reason that you get into this field. I always say to, a lot of my employees over the years, the more you worry about money, the less you'll have it. But if you're passionate about something, and that's really what defines a lot of the work that we've done. If you're passionate about something, much like yourself, your expertise will shine, right? The people will want to depend on you. But even those good people that are in this industry all around the world today, they're getting burnt out. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's true. Whether from defensive or offensive, cybersecurity is demanding. It's a demanding field because the bad guys are not stopping. Yesterday, I think I was reading this news about a collection agency got compromised, and it was actually back in January they got compromised. They didn't find out until just about a few weeks ago, right? So the bad guys are always, I would say 10 steps ahead of us, and we are sometimes less resourced. Then this goes back to about I think about 3 or 4 of our points that we have already talked about, right? The fact that we are always behind on the bad guys due to internal politics, due to lack of resources, due to lack of tooling, and all these are part of the reason why we get so burned out, because you have these SOC analyst guys, looking at the screen 24/7, fighting against APTs, all over the globe. And why wouldn't you get burned out, right? So these are all things that is leading to us making this field more challenging. And especially lack of resources as well, gap, skills gap. So all these are contributing factors of how we get burnout in this industry. The constant pressure, from OffSec, for instance, my team, for instance, we are always looking for new threat actors like TTPs. How can we emulate those things? When we run adversarial simulations, how can we stay up to date about these guys at TTPs? And that can sometimes have a mental, toll on your mental health, right? So how do we approach, or how do we address some part of these burnout issues? Well, we need to be able to prioritize our teams, well-being, as an institution, whether you're a consulting firm, or your enterprise. We always have to look at the mental state or the health, well-being of our employees. An example that I have seen some organizations doing, even one of my current, employer doing right now is, we do have half day, working on every other Friday, right? And that actually happens. The good thing is it happens on a payday. So every payday we have half a day, work. So, we take off early on Friday, just to recover, take a quick break, right? And also having unlimited PTOs, right? So you can if you need to just take a quick break, freshen up, take a break, and then come back all refreshed. I have seen some organizations doing all these kind of things to help, reduce this amount of, burnout. So I'll say these are some things that organizations should be looking into. How do we prioritize our employees' well-being, especially in the cybersecurity, being the fact that it's much more demanding and it can have a toll on us.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. The last one that we have on the list here for what the hell is wrong with enterprise security software in enterprise security in 2024 is the aspect of security islands. And what this simply means is that there's a lot of process isolation in security that's in enterprise today. So let me expand upon that further. So in a traditional enterprise security program, of course, you have the CISO, it's quarterbacked by that. You might have different facets of enterprise security that relates to security operations, maybe those that are running a SOC. Those that are doing threat vulnerability management, those that are doing internal pen testing, that are doing application security efforts and dynamic scanning and static analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, threat modeling. And so the aspect of security islands is that it's a lot of fractured, isolated activities that don't talk to one another. That's simple. And one of the points that Kofi brought up in terms of why we're kind of losing this battle, we're not kind of losing, we are losing the battle of cybersecurity, is, he listed a lot of different valuable reasons, but one of the things that I want to mention is disorganization. That relates to this concept of security islands. When you run a security program, you're building an ecosystem, right? And going back to leadership, a lot of leaders in this space do not know how to architect an ecosystem within their security program. And what this means is that as you lay, you're kind of you got to look at yourself like a general, right? And you got to see what sort of resources in terms of internal resources, external third-party partners, internal tools, and then of course your auxiliary forces that are in IT, because they are helping to do things like configuration management. They're helping to do things like access control management. There's things that IT does that security needs to work with, not against, in order to basically have a cohesive ecosystem. So a lot of these things like threat vulnerability management or AppSec or threat modeling or risk management or compliance and audits, they're all done with their own mantra, with their own goals and missions.
Yeah.
And because they all have a report card to somebody and they want to show off that report card. This goes back to number one on politics, right?
Yeah.
So my stuff is better than your stuff and my agenda is more important than your agenda, right? So everyone's trying to trump one another, and that's the wrong way to think about it. So until the security islands can be bridged and there's a true ecosystem of processes and a workflow of security, we're still going to be, very disjointed. Now you take the other side, which is, organized crime groups or nation states that have their own operations for being on the offensive. They do not play around. They do not play around, and they're methodical. They're mission driven. And there's no someone's going to mouth off and say, well, I want to do this. No, you're going to go into recon or OSINT or you're going to do spear phishing for the next, 2 weeks. And you're going to do it under this context, and that's it. Go sit in your chair. they have a workflow, right? And they're very mission driven. To your point, where you open up, Kofi, about doing the example of emulating criminal intent with the pen test. We go back to PCI. You have compliance-based or inspired pen testing, and then you have the types of adversarial exercises that are emulating criminal intent. Criminals are not going to bring a shotgun into your environment so that they can be like Yosemite Sam and blowing up the place and making a lot of noise. They're going to be, they have a mission. Their number one mission is to not get caught. Because like any criminal mentality, you want to go in and maybe you might not get the secrets to the kingdom or the database with the sensitive information that you're looking for. But you definitely do not want to get caught so that you leave any sort of residue that you've been there, right? And this is the essence of what cybercrime. But cybersecurity islands is a result of poor ecosystem architecture by leaders in that space that do not know how to look at their program overall and say, how am I going to create a workflow that bridges everything together?
And I think one of the reasons why there is this silo maybe is because how cybersecurity was first introduced into enterprises. I mean, people have long looked at cybersecurity professionals as the bad guys, right? We've had this bad connotation about hackers. Even the media, the real word was supposed to be crackers, which was like, bad actors. But then the media kind of like, flipped it around and then like had that mind, thing about hackers. So the hackers did it, the hackers did this, right? And even though they're supposed to be the good guys who like, hackers are those who take something, modify them, even make it better, right? The bad ones make it weaponized in a bad way, right? So there's this whole notion about us that they didn't present us in a good way. So when we were implanted into organization to do good stuff, we're still looked at like the outside, child, right? And it was very difficult for us to blend in and, integrate with other, institutes, other stakeholders within the organization, right? So there has been some, it's been out there gradually. I think we are doing better, but yes, the isolation is still there, right? And as you said, even the cyber criminals that we're trying to emulate, they are much more organized than us. They are like much more structured, even than actual enterprises, right? Where you have the GRC for, guys, somewhere, marketing somewhere, HR somewhere, engineering guys somewhere, cloud guys somewhere, and then offset people somewhere, and then SecOps people somewhere, not talking to each other, right? And I think that is not good. And I think over time, if you do a proper work, you are able to bring this kind of like, remove this silo and then bring them together. And I'll give an example of what I do normally when I first join an organization and I'm building or I'm leading a team or leading, the offset program. What the first thing I do is I meet up with all the stakeholders, the leaders of all the stakeholders, all the directors of all the stakeholders, regardless of whatever department it is, right? Human resource, marketing, whatever. And these guys, most of the time when I talk to them, they are surprised that, what are you doing? Why are you trying to make us looking like we're friends? We are not, right? Like, no, we're supposed to be like that. We're supposed to have one common goal. We are one team. I'm not supposed to just be in a silo and then just like hack my way out, but I'm supposed to be part of the whole organization. It's an institution, right? So that is my approach. And the moment I see that, the moment I do those things, I begin to see like a very good communication, like, that kind of like a healthy environment. Human resources know about my team knows about the SecOps team know about my team, legal knows about us, GS knows about us. And then that is when I see that kind of like, collaboration between us when I come out and then introduce myself and my team to these different departments and then, bury that kind of like, bridge. So, silo. So I would say, that is there. But my approach or my advice is we need to stay, communicative, collaborative. Let's see ourselves as one institution with one objective. Tony?
Good stuff, Kofi. Hey, this time flew by, but we We really covered a lot of hot topics, and like I said numerous times, and you did as well, each of these topics really warrant their own podcast in their own right. But this is the first edition of the cybersecurity podcast from the Dirty South crew in the A. It's been an honor to share the stage with you, Kofi, today.
Yes, sir.
I look
Likewise.
forward to our next conversation, where we're going to keep it real in the Dirty South Cybersecurity Podcast. Any parting thoughts? Oh, by the way, out there, if you do like this podcast, please share. Please follow also Kofi and myself. We'll have our socials on frame so you can follow, and please like and subscribe, and please share, and please follow us as we take a global journey. We're going to have some fun when we do this podcast, talk about real issues affecting the industry. I look forward to when we both can go to a nice, maybe a Peruvian spot or maybe a Ghanese spot, you know,
yes, sir.
In the A, and get and talk about, we got to have food because we eat, our people eat, right?
Yeah, we do. We have good food, man. I know some joints here in Atlanta. We'll go out, you know, we'll go. And I had some great food when I went to Peru. Great food, man.
Oh, yeah.
I have so much great food that when I came back, and I think I had another project, I went to Miami, and I was like, I have to get myself a Peruvian food. So, yeah, I looked around for Peruvian joint. When I was like, yep, it's a good
road
food
trip.
here.
Road trip. All right, brother. Good serving with you today. Shout out to everybody in the A, and take care.
All righty.